Near field communications. Good heavens. This is one that just makes me roll my eyeballs. It's near field. So supposedly you've got to get your phone right up next to it, or your near field card right up next to the reader, like within a half an inch. But the weakness is really this. Let me explain it to you this way. I spent 5 years living on a sailboat. And during that time, I wasn't doing any software development for various reasons having to do with the non-disclosure and non-compete agreements that I had signed. So I did do some things like install some networks at a marina, like Charleston City Marina. And it's 3/4 of a mile from the end of the docks where people put their boats to the house on the land where they have their Wi-Fi. And I wanted Pete to install a network for less than what they'd been quoted using consumer-grade hardware. So I put up a shield to protect the rest of the city from this, okay, to block it so it was directional, but not very directional, and then used a whip antenna to cover the entire docks. The whip antenna is a high-gain, non-directional 24 dB antenna, as opposed to the 2 and 4 dB antennas that you normally see on consumer-grade hardware. It worked beautifully. I mean, a single $100 antenna and a $30 router combined together, and basically a piece of aluminum put on the roof covered their entire marina, as opposed to the $150,000 they were being quoted for putting in repeaters up and down the docks. So the hardware was basically cheap enough to be throwaway and give them spares, and I set up 2 of them so if they wanted to just switch one off and turn the other one on, they could, and they'd be up and running. But basically, here's a $200 solution to $100,000 or more. That was just for the hardware, plus $75,000 for installation of all these repeaters. And you put repeaters up and down the docks in a saltwater environment, they're going to fail, so high maintenance. Whereas here's a cheap, easy solution. So wireless Wi-Fi is only supposed to reach 100 feet. I made it reach a mile with just an antenna. So what's the chances with near-field communication that if you want to be able to read somebody's card as they're scanning it inside the Starbucks, you pull up in the parking lot and you put a directional 100 dB antenna in your car and listen in? So, near-field communications, anything that is, it just reads something and provides a response, is going to be crackable with just a better antenna. And we see examples of this. The most common way for people to steal cars these days and to break into them is to use the remote start or remote door unlock and just listen in for people's remotes when they use it and then duplicate the signal. And they just use a bigger antenna and an amplifier. That's all they have to do. Or they record it and use a bigger signal and an amplifier. And boom, off goes your car. How did it disappear? Well, somebody took it because they didn't have real security. They used this kind of fake security. Probably the worst security in existence right now is Internet of Things. My neighbor across the street bought a camera to look at his driveway. A little security camera thing. And he was having trouble configuring it. I helped him configure it. And in the process, we were talking about security, and I said, well, I think you should get a separate router and put this on a separate network from the inside of your home, because that way you can isolate it from your network, because these things don't tend to have good security. And he said to me, oh, you couldn't crack into that. And I went, oh, really? Give me a half an hour. It took me about 15 minutes and 2 Google searches to find the basically root password for the camera that was burned into the ROM, non-changeable, so that you could log in. And I found it and took it and used it, and I could pick up his camera in his driveway. That's not exactly the kind of piece of information you want, dispersed to the world, because it also took me, in that same 15 minutes, the ability to be able to log in and find that it's running Linux and BusyBox, and I could load software onto his camera to run. There are botnets out there with hundreds of thousands of these things in basically security cameras. So those are one of the things that would benefit tremendously from real security, and probably some system, I would think, that's on a blockchain that tracks them and allows you to accurately show who purchased it, who should be able to change the passwords, and protect the entire system and its security. So one of those things that we always get into is backdoors in systems. The FBI wants to have backdoors into our system. You know, this is not the first time they have gone around with this. I'm old enough to remember the Clipper chip, which was a security encryption chip that was developed. Supposedly it had really good security. It did. But it also had a backdoor that was put into it so that you could do search warrants and decrypt stuff. And it took about 3.5 months before somebody leaked the backdoor, and basically the chip ceased to exist because everybody knew the backdoor and there was no security. You know, anytime there's a backdoor and there's a lot of money being protected with it, there is a tremendous incentive for people to leak that information, or to crack it, or to break it. Security like this is kind of like DVDs. Yes, DVDs had a good encryption scheme, except they sent the password with the device so that the person could play the DVD. And before long, people figured it out, basically. So these security systems don't last. And anything that has a backdoor guarantees that the state-level actors and the other people that are highly motivated will be the ones that get access. Not just the low-motivated, the high-motivated people will be the ones that have access to things they're not supposed to have access to. And I think that's an absolute 100% guarantee. And that's true for every backdoor, not just some. If you have some kind of a backdoor, people will figure out how to get through it. It's a guarantee, all the time. So I want to talk about chipping dogs, and why not people? This is one of those ones, you know, we want to chip our cows so we can track them with something like an NFC chip, and dogs, and I'm not too keen on this. As soon as you chip something, it's going to allow other people to track it besides just the ones that are supposed to. And also, I know something about the beef industry, and implanted RFIDs have a tendency to move around. You put it in the cow's ear, you find it in the rump roast, literally. So I'm not keen on one of those in me, because I suspect that it has some unfortunate health consequences you don't really want. Also, you know, I find that to be a pretty invasive process. I know this is being used by some businesses today for IT security. I think if they asked me to chip, I'd tell them where to push it. Okay. The last one is that software is never 100% fixed. Okay. I call this the Tootsie Pop solutions. Firewalls on the outside and no security on the inside. University of Wyoming is a good example of that. On the outside, we have two-factor authentication. On the inside, once you're in. All soft and chewy and easy to access everything. Low levels of security. Well, guess what? Sooner or later, somebody's going to get through the crunchy, hard outside, just like that owl, and they're going to take a bite out of you on the inside. And I'm not keen on that. Security should be everywhere, on every system, without exception. So that's kind of the rundown of things that I think about personal security and what works and what doesn't.